My son used my perfect credit to co-sign his mortgage, then moved 3 states away and told security I was a stranger. He thought he had successfully cut me out of his life. He forgot about the one legal document that still tied us together, and he was about to learn that a co-signer's signature can be a lifeline, or an anchor. Before we begin, I want to thank you for being here, for lending an old woman your ear. If you believe that a mother's love should be a foundation, not a doormat, and that respect for our elders is a debt that must be paid, then you have found your people. It warms my heart to see our community gathered here, so please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let me tell you the story of how my son tried to erase me from his life, and how I had to remind him that my name, the one he was so willing to discard, was the only thing holding his world together. My name is Beatrice Sinclair, and for 68 years, my life has been a study in quiet consistency. My world is a small, paid-off bungalow in the South Shore neighborhood of Chicago, a house filled with the scent of lemon polish and the memories of my late husband, Samuel. I am a retired social worker, a woman who spent her life navigating the complex, often heartbreaking systems of the city to help others. My days are a gentle, predictable rhythm. Morning prayers, tending to my small garden, weekly Bible study, and long, peaceful evenings with a book. The anchor of this quiet world, the sun around which my own small planet orbited, has always been my son, Lawrence. At 43, Lawrence lived in a world that was a universe away from my own. He and his wife, Candace, resided in a sleek, modern townhouse in Lincoln Park, a place of gleaming glass and stainless steel that always felt cold to me no matter the season. Lawrence worked in logistics, a job that was as vague to me as it was impressive to his friends. He was a man obsessed with the image of success, a desperation I saw in the expensive brand-new car he couldn't afford and the designer clothes Candace wore. 2 years ago they had come to me with a dream. They had found the perfect townhouse, but their ambition had outpaced their bank account. Their credit was stretched thin, their savings non-existent. The bank, they explained, would not approve the massive mortgage on their own. They needed a co-signer. They needed me. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the mortgage application spread out before me. The numbers were staggering, a sum so large it made my own hands tremble. But I looked at my son's face, at his hopeful, pleading eyes, and I saw the little boy I had raised, the boy whose every dream I had tried to nurture. My own finances were the opposite of his. My house was paid for, my credit was perfect, my savings, though modest, were substantial. I was the picture of the financial stability they so desperately lacked. To sign my name was an act of a mother's love, a final, significant investment in my son's happiness. So I signed. And with that signature I tied my own financial health, my good name, to their precarious, over-leveraged life. The weekend of their disappearance began like any other. I had tried calling them on Saturday morning to confirm our usual Sunday dinner plans, but my call went straight to voicemail. I tried again in the afternoon. Voicemail. I called Candace's phone. Voicemail. A small, cold knot of worry began to form in my stomach. They were always tethered to their phones. For both of them to be unreachable was unheard of. By Sunday morning, the worry had blossomed into a full-blown panic. I left a dozen messages. I sent texts that remained unread. My mind raced through a terrible litany of possibilities. A car accident, a sudden illness, a home invasion. I called my neighbor, Arthur Pendleton, a retired postal worker and my late husband's best friend. His calm, steady presence was a balm to my frayed nerves. "I'm sure it's nothing, Beatrice," he said, his voice a comforting rumble. "But if it will put your mind at ease, I'll drive you over there. We'll check on them ourselves." The drive to Lincoln Park was the longest of my life. The Sunday morning streets of Chicago were quiet, but my heart was a frantic, chaotic drum. As we turned onto their trendy, tree-lined street, I saw it. A sign hammered into the small patch of lawn in front of their townhouse. A stark white sign with bold red letters. "For rent." "No," I whispered, the word a choked, strangled sound. "No, that can't be right." We parked the car and I stumbled out onto the pavement. The house looked hollow. The cheerful yellow curtains in the living room window were gone, leaving a black, vacant square. I rushed up the steps, my keys trembling in my hand. The key to their front door, the one they had given me for emergencies, slid into the lock. Turned. I pushed the door open and the breath left my lungs in a painful rush. The house was empty. Completely, utterly empty. The expensive modern furniture was gone. The oversized television was gone. The abstract art on the walls was gone. All that remained were the ghosts of their life. Pale rectangles on the walls where pictures had hung, indentations in the carpet where the sofa had been. The air was stale, silent, thick with the feeling of abandonment. I walked through the rooms in a daze, my footsteps echoing in the profound, shocking emptiness. Their bedrooms were bare, the closets stripped clean. The kitchen was scrubbed, every last pot, pan and plate gone. They had not just moved. They had vanished. They had been surgically excised from this place, leaving no trace, no note, no forwarding address. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, the for rent sign a cruel mockery through the front window. They had left. They had moved out of a house that I was still legally, financially responsible for. They had severed all contact. They had abandoned me. The cold knot of worry in my stomach was now a jagged, icy stone of a truth so brutal I could barely comprehend it. My son, my only child, had disappeared, and he had taken my heart and my good name with him. The days that followed the discovery of the empty house were a fog of confusion and a deep, gnawing fear. The silence from Lawrence and Candace was absolute. My calls went to voicemail boxes that were now full. My texts remained undelivered. It was as if they had ceased to exist. But the monthly mortgage payment, a direct debit from a joint account I shared with my son, was a stark, brutal reminder that they and my legal obligation to them were very real. My neighbor, Arthur, became my rock, my co-detective in the mystery of my own family's disappearance. His methodical, practical mind, honed by 40 years of navigating the labyrinth of the U.S. Postal Service, was a perfect counterbalance to my panicked, emotional state. "We start with the facts, Beatrice," he said, sitting at my kitchen table, a notepad and pen in his hand. "Fact 1, they are gone. Fact 2, they left in a hurry and didn't want to be found. That means they have something to hide." Our investigation began. I called the parents of my grandchildren's friends, my voice trembling with a shame I couldn't conceal. They were all shocked. They told me Lawrence and Candace had pulled the children from their private school a week before they vanished, claiming a sudden family emergency required them to move indefinitely. They had given no further details. I called the Human Resources Department of Lawrence's logistics company. A polite but firm woman informed me that Mr. Vance had resigned his position 2 weeks prior, citing personal reasons. He had left no forwarding address. Their social media, once a constant stream of curated photos of their perfect life, had been completely scrubbed. Their profiles were deleted, their digital footprints erased. It was a modern-day vanishing act, a deliberate, calculated disappearance designed to leave no trail. "They're running from something," Arthur said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But what? Debt? Trouble with the law?" The answer, I suspected, was far simpler and far more painful. They were running from me. The breakthrough came from Arthur. He still had friends within the postal system, old-timers who knew the inner workings of the mail. He made a few discreet calls. A day later he came to my house, his face a mixture of grim triumph and sorrow for what he was about to tell me. "I found something," he said, sitting down at the table. "It's not much, but it's a start. A mail forwarding request was put in under their name 2 weeks ago. Not to a specific address. To a general delivery post office box." "Where?" I asked, my heart leaping into my throat. "Raleigh, North Carolina," he said, his eyes full of a deep, sad pity. "North Carolina. 3 states away. A place where we had no family, no connections. It was a deliberate, calculated flight to a place of anonymity. The knowledge of where they were did not bring relief. It brought a new, sharper pain. This was not a panicked flight from danger. This was a planned escape. An escape from their life in Chicago. An escape from me. But I am a mother. And the primal, instinctual need to know that my son, that my grandchildren were safe overrode everything else. It overrode my pride. It overrode my hurt. I had to see them. I had to look them in the eye and ask them the question that was burning a hole in my soul. Why? I went to my bank and withdrew a significant portion of my savings, the money I had so carefully put away for my old age. I went to the Greyhound station downtown, the air thick with the smell of diesel and desperation. I bought a one-way ticket to Raleigh, North Carolina. Arthur tried to talk me out of it. "Beatrice, what are you going to do?" he pleaded. "Just show up on their doorstep? If they wanted to be found, they would have called you." "I don't care, Arthur," I said, my voice full of a stubborn, desperate resolve. I have to see them. I have to know they're all right. The long bus journey south was a journey through a landscape of my own grief. I watched the flat plains of Illinois and Indiana give way to the rolling hills of Kentucky and Tennessee. With every mile that passed, I felt more alone, more unmoored from the life I had known. I was a 68-year-old woman traveling alone to a strange city, in search of a family that had made it clear they did not want to be found. I arrived in Raleigh on a hot, humid afternoon. The air was thick, heavy, foreign. I stood outside the bus station, my small suitcase in my hand, and I felt a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled my knees. I was a needle in a haystack. But I was a needle with a purpose. I would find my son. I had to. It was the only thought that kept me moving forward. Finding my son in a city of 500,000 people with only a post office box as a starting point felt like an impossible task. But I am a social worker by training. I am a patient, methodical woman who knows how to navigate bureaucracy and follow a paper trail. For 2 weeks, Raleigh became my new casework. I spent my days in the public library using their computers to search public records. I cross-referenced their names with property deeds, with utility registrations, with any digital breadcrumb I could find. I lived in a small, cheap motel room, the kind with a lingering smell of stale smoke, and I ate my meals alone at diner counters. It was a lonely, soul-crushing existence, but the thought of my grandchildren, of their sweet faces, kept me going. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place through a stroke of luck. I was searching for Candace's name in the local business registries and I found it. She had registered a new lifestyle consulting business, a sole proprietorship with the state of North Carolina. And on the application as the business address, she had listed their home address. The address was not in Raleigh itself, but in Cary, a wealthy, exclusive suburb known for its sprawling new construction homes and its manicured, perfect lawns. The address was in a place called Prestonwood Creek, a name that sounded both elegant and utterly soulless. It was a gated community. My heart pounded with a mixture of exhilaration and pure, cold dread. I had found them. But the gate, the physical barrier between their new world and my old one, felt like a terrible omen. I called a taxi. As we drove through the lush, green suburbs of Cary, I felt a growing sense of alienation. The houses were enormous mini-mansions packed together on small, treeless lots. It was a landscape of manufactured wealth, a world built to impress. We arrived at the gates of Prestonwood Creek. A high, ornate iron gate blocked the entrance with a small stone guardhouse beside it. The taxi driver pulled up to the intercom. A uniformed security guard stepped out of the guardhouse, his face impassive. "I'm here to see the Vance family," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Lawrence and Candace Sinclair." I used their full names, trying to sound official. The guard looked at a list on his clipboard, then back at me. "You're not on the residence-approved guest list, ma'am." I'm his mother," I said, the words feeling weak, pathetic. "Beatrice Sinclair. Please just tell them I'm here. It's a surprise." The guard looked at me, at my simple dress, at my tired, anxious face, and I saw a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He sighed, a sound of bored reluctance, and went back into the guardhouse. I watched through the glass as he picked up a phone. He spoke for a moment, then listened, his expression unchanging. He hung up the phone and walked back out to the taxi. He leaned down, avoiding my eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a flat, professional monotone. "I spoke with the residents at that address. They have stated that they do not know you. They have asked that you be escorted off the property." The words did not compute. My mind refused to accept them. "What? Oh, there must be a mistake," I stammered. "I am his mother. Tell them Beatrice is here." "I did, ma'am," the guard said, his voice taking on a harder edge. The message was clear. "You are not welcome here. Now you need to leave." He gestured behind us and I saw a white security vehicle, its lights flashing silently, pull up behind our taxi. The humiliation was a physical thing. It was a hot, sickening wave that washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. They had not just refused to see me. They had denied my very existence. They had told a complete stranger that they did not know their own mother. And they had sent a security guard to chase me away like a common trespasser, a piece of unwanted trash. The taxi driver, a kind-faced man who had witnessed the entire brutal exchange, just shook his head slowly. "Where to now, ma'am?" he asked gently. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. He understood. He put the car in gear and drove away from the iron gates, the security vehicle following us for a quarter of a mile, a silent, menacing escort, ensuring that the unwanted element was well and truly removed from their pristine, perfect world. I stared out the window, the tears finally coming hot and silent. I saw the manicured lawns, the enormous empty houses, the symbols of the life my son had chosen, a life that had no room for me. I had crossed 3 states, spent my life savings, all for this. To be publicly, profoundly, and utterly rejected by my own child. The hope that had sustained me, the desperate, foolish hope of a mother's heart, was gone. And in its place was a cold, empty void. The long bus ride back to Chicago was a journey through a gray, featureless landscape of grief. I stared out the window for hours, but I saw nothing of the passing country. I saw only the iron gates of Prestonwood Creek, the pitying look on the security guard's face, the flash of the security vehicle's lights in the rearview mirror. The humiliation had replayed in my mind on a relentless, torturous loop. They did not know me. The 4 cruelest words in the English language. I arrived back at my bungalow in South Shore, a shell of the woman who had left. The house, once my sanctuary, felt empty, haunted by the ghosts of a family that no longer existed. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. The stress, the exhaustion, the profound, soul-deep heartbreak finally took their toll on my body. A small cold I had been ignoring blossomed into a raging fever. A cough that had been a minor annoyance settled deep in my chest, becoming a rattling, painful thing. Within a week I was in the grip of a severe case of pneumonia. I have never felt so sick, so weak, so utterly alone in my life. The simple act of getting out of bed to get a glass of water felt like climbing a mountain. The fever brought with it a delirium, a waking nightmare where the walls of my bedroom would melt away, replaced by the cold, sterile walls of that gated community. In my darkest, most fever-addled moments I would reach for the phone. I had, through a series of painstaking, desperate online searches, managed to find their new unlisted phone number in Cary. My hands shaking, my voice a hoarse, rasping whisper, I would call. It always went to voicemail. "Lawrence," I would whisper into the phone, my voice cracking with the effort. "It's your mother. I'm sick, baby. I'm so sick. Please, just call me. I need to hear your voice." I left message after desperate message, my pleas swallowed by the cold, indifferent silence of their voicemail. No one called back. No one checked on me. The son I had raised, the woman he had married, knew their mother was alone and sick, and they did nothing. They had not just abandoned me in a new city. They were abandoning me to my illness, to my potential death. The only human contact I had during that terrible week was my neighbor, Arthur. He had seen that my mail was piling up, that my curtains were drawn day and night. He came knocking, and when I didn't answer, he used the spare key I had given him years ago to let himself in. He found me in my bed, weak, dehydrated, and delirious with fever. He took one look at me and his face set into a mask of grim, furious determination. He didn't lecture me. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply took over. He called a doctor to make a house call. He went to the pharmacy and filled my prescriptions. He sat by my bedside for hours, forcing me to drink water, spooning warm, nourishing soup into my mouth when I was too weak to lift my own head. He was the one who put cool cloths on my forehead. He was the one who answered my phone when it rang, his voice a low, protective growl to the telemarketers who were the only ones calling. He was my nurse, my protector, my family. He was everything my own son was not. As the fever began to break and my mind started to clear, the full, devastating weight of my son's final betrayal settled upon me. The humiliation at the gate had been a deep wound. But this silence in the face of my sickness, this was the final, unforgivable twisting of the knife. It was an act of cruelty so profound, so absolute. It severed the last lingering threads of a mother's foolish, stubborn love. One afternoon, as I was finally strong enough to sit up in a chair, Arthur was there, reading the newspaper. I looked at this kind, decent man, who had shown me more care and compassion in 1 week than my own son had in years. "He left me to die, Arthur," I said, my voice no longer a whisper but a quiet, steady thing as clear and as hard as a diamond. "He knew I was sick and he did nothing." Arthur folded his newspaper and looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Yes, Beatrice," he said quietly. "He did." In that moment something inside me shifted. The grief, the heartbreak, the shame, they were still there. But they were no longer the dominant forces. They had been burned away by the fever, replaced by a new, cold, and utterly serene resolve. The social worker in me, the woman who had spent her life fighting for others, finally woke up to fight for herself. My son and his wife thought I was a liability, a problem to be discarded. They had no idea that I was also a cosigner. They had no idea that my name, the name they had so easily disowned, was the very foundation of their new perfect life. And I, the woman they had left to die, was about to make a phone call that would bring that life crashing down around them. My recovery was slow, but my new purpose gave me a strength I hadn't felt in years. Each day as I regained my physical health, my resolve hardened. The woman who had wept on the bus to Raleigh was gone, replaced by a woman of cold, quiet, and meticulous purpose. I was no longer a grieving mother. I was a guarantor about to report a catastrophic failure of character. Arthur, my steadfast friend, watched this transformation with a quiet, approving eye. He saw the fire return to my spirit, and he knew it was not the hot, chaotic fire of anger, but the cold, controlled fire of justice. My first step was to go to the old metal file cabinet in my basement, the one where Samuel and I had kept all of our important papers. I found the file for the Lincoln Park townhouse, and inside, a thick, intimidating document. The original mortgage agreement for the new house in Cary, North Carolina. I had insisted on keeping a copy, a decision Lawrence had rolled his eyes at but which I had insisted upon, a relic of a lifetime of careful record-keeping. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had signed the papers, and I read it. I read every word of the dense, legal jargon that had once intimidated me. Now I read it with a new, cold clarity. I was not just a co-signer, I was the primary guarantor. My financial standing, my perfect credit score built over a lifetime of fiscal responsibility, my substantial savings, they were the bedrock upon which the entire loan was built. I remembered the loan officer, a slick young man, explaining that without my financial profile, Lawrence and Candace, with their high debt-to-income ratio and spotty credit, wouldn't have qualified for a loan on a garden shed, let alone a $500,000 house. And in the fine print, in a dense section titled Loan Covenants and Conditions, I found the clause. It was a standard, rarely invoked clause that dealt with the responsibilities and representations of the guarantor. It stated in clear, unambiguous language that the guarantor's backing was contingent upon a continued good faith relationship with the primary borrowers. It gave the bank the right to reevaluate the loan's risk profile in the event of a material change in circumstances, including but not limited to a formal notification by the guarantor of a withdrawal of their financial and moral support. It was a kill switch. A legal, contractual kill switch designed to protect the bank from exactly this kind of situation. A situation where the financial foundation of a loan could no longer in good conscience support the borrowers. I did not call a lawyer. A lawyer would have been expensive and slow. I was a social worker. I knew how to navigate a system, how to get to the right person, how to state my case in a way that demanded action. The following Monday morning, my voice steady, my heart a calm, even drum, I made the call. I did not call the general customer service number. I found the direct line for the bank's risk management department, the department that deals with high-risk loans and potential defaults. A professional-sounding woman answered. Risk management, this is Sarah speaking. Good morning, Sarah. I began, my voice calm, clear, and full of a quiet, unshakable authority. My name is Beatrice Sinclair. I am calling to report a material change in circumstances regarding a mortgage on which I am the primary guarantor. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of typing. Okay, Mrs. Sinclair. Do you have the loan number? I gave it to her, reading it directly from the document in front of me. I gave her the property address in Cary, North Carolina. I gave her my own personal information, my social security number, my date of birth, all the details that would prove my identity and my legal standing. Yes, I have the account pulled up, Mrs. Sinclair, she said, her tone still a little bored, professional. What seems to be the problem? The problem, Sarah, I replied, my voice as cool and as steady as the waters of Lake Michigan in January, is that I am hereby formally withdrawing my financial and moral guarantee for this loan. There has been a complete and irreparable breakdown in my relationship with the primary borrowers, my son and daughter-in-law. I can no longer, in good conscience, vouch for their character or their financial stability. I am officially reporting this loan as a high risk of imminent default. The boredom in her voice vanished, replaced by a new, sharp, professional attention. I see, Mrs. Sinclair, she stammered, clearly taken aback. That is a very serious statement. Can you provide any further details? I can, I said. They have abandoned their previous residence, to which I am also a co-signer, without notice. They have moved 3 states away and severed all contact. When I located them to inquire about their well-being, they denied knowing me and had me escorted from their property by security. They have refused all attempts at communication, even when notified of my recent serious illness. I believe this constitutes a severe breakdown in the family relationship, as well as demonstrating a pattern of reckless and untrustworthy behavior. I can no longer be a party to the financial risk they represent. There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the risk assessment algorithms flashing red. A guarantor, the very person whose financial stability had made the loan possible, was not just pulling her support. She was actively, formally flagging the loan as a toxic asset. For a bank, this was a 5-alarm fire. Thank you for this information, Mrs. Sinclair, Sarah said finally, her voice now full of a new, grave seriousness. We take a guarantor's report very seriously. We will be escalating this to our underwriting and legal departments immediately. A senior loan officer will be in touch with you shortly. I had done it. I had lit the fuse. I hung up the phone, my hand perfectly steady. I had not screamed. I had not cried. I had simply stated the facts. I had used the cold, hard language of the system they so admired to report a simple, devastating truth. My son was a bad risk. And now the system would have to act accordingly. The bank, as I had known it would, moved with the swift, merciless efficiency of a predator that has just sensed a mortal wound in its prey. A primary guarantor formally withdrawing her support and actively flagging the borrowers as a character and financial risk is not a situation any financial institution takes lightly. It is a red alert in the risk management department, a signal that the very foundation of the loan has crumbled. Their legal and underwriting departments immediately went to work. They reviewed the original mortgage application and saw, with a dawning, horrified clarity, what I had known all along. That Lawrence and Candace, with their own modest incomes, significant credit card debt, and a history of over-leveraging themselves, would never have qualified for a loan of this magnitude without my name, my assets, my perfect credit history backing them up. I was not just a co-signer. I was the entire foundation of the loan. And I had just very calmly and very legally declared that foundation to be rotten. They had no choice but to protect their investment. They invoked the very clause I had discovered in the loan agreement, the material adverse change clause. It gave the bank the right, in the event of a significant unforeseen change in the borrower's or guarantor's circumstances that materially increased the bank's risk, to reevaluate and, if necessary, rescind the original loan terms. The official letter, sent via certified mail, arrived at my son's beautiful new home in Cary, North Carolina, on a Thursday. I can only imagine the scene. Candace, likely still basking in the afterglow of their successful escape, would have seen the intimidating envelope from the mortgage bank's legal department and opened it with a flicker of annoyance, assuming it was just more boring paperwork. And then she would have read the words. The cold, hard, and utterly devastating words that would bring their entire fraudulent world crashing down. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair, it would have begun. Due to a material adverse change in the conditions under which this loan was underwritten, specifically the formal withdrawal of support from your primary financial guarantor, Mrs. Beatrice Sinclair, we are hereby invoking our rights under Clause 27B of your mortgage agreement. The original loan approval has been rescinded. The panic, I imagine, would have been immediate and absolute. But the bank wasn't finished. The letter would have contained a second, even more devastating paragraph. You are hereby required to secure new financing for the full, outstanding balance of your loan within 90 days. This new loan application will be subject to our standard income and credit verification, and will not include the financial profile of the original guarantor. Failure to secure new financing within this time frame will result in the full, outstanding balance of the original loan becoming immediately due and payable. Non-payment will result in the immediate initiation of foreclosure proceedings. And that was the true checkmate. Because they couldn't. Their credit was stretched to its absolute limit. Their incomes, without my financial bedrock beneath them, were not nearly enough to qualify for a loan of that size. They were trapped. Utterly, completely, and beautifully trapped in a house they no longer legally qualified for. The frantic, hysterical phone call from my son came that evening. I had been waiting for it. I let it ring 3 times, then answered, my voice a calm, serene, "Hello? Mama," he shrieked, his voice a raw, ragged sound of pure, unadulterated terror. "The bank. They sent a letter. They're calling the loan due. They said you withdrew your support. What did you do? You've ruined us." I let him scream for a moment, his panic a quiet, satisfying symphony on the other end of the line. "I did nothing, Lawrence," I replied, my voice as cool and as calm as a winter morning. "I simply informed the bank of the truth. That our family relationship had suffered an irreparable breakdown. A fact you yourself demonstrated quite clearly when you denied my existence and had me escorted from your property by a security guard. But that was just a misunderstanding," he stammered, his lies now pathetic, desperate. "Was it?" I asked quietly. "It felt quite clear to me. As did your silence when I was sick. You made your choice, my dear. You chose your new fancy life over your own mother. And now you must face the consequences of that choice. It seems that without my humble Chicago name on your mortgage, your fancy life is not quite as secure as you thought it was. But we'll be homeless," he wept. "That does sound like a problem," I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "I suggest you speak to your wife. She seems to be the one full of brilliant plans." I hung up the phone, my hand perfectly steady. The house of cards they had so arrogantly, so cruelly built on the foundation of my love and my good name, was now collapsing in on itself. They had called me a liability. I had just become the one who called their loan due. I never spoke to them again. The last I heard, through a distant cousin, was that they were forced to sell the house in a desperate fire sale to avoid foreclosure, losing a significant amount of money in the process. Their partnership of greed, unable to survive the harsh reality of their own consequences, had crumbled into a mess of blame and recrimination. Me. I stayed in my small, quiet bungalow in the South Shore of Chicago. My peace was restored. My dignity was reclaimed. My revenge was not in their ruin, but in my own quiet, unshakable strength. I had been deemed an embarrassment, a liability, a woman to be disowned and discarded. But in the end I was the one who held the power, the one who had, with a single devastating phone call, proven that a mother's good name, when betrayed, can be a liability of a very, very different kind. And that was a truth that was worth more than any house, any amount of money. It was worth everything.